7th, 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine February 24th, 2022, 12 days ago. Yesterday's show was a dedication to the people and the spirit of Ukraine as shared with the world through social media. I urge you to experience it for yourself. Visit reddit.com/r/Ukraine. Use Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, or whatever other social media you're using, to search Ukrainian accounts. Visit KievIndependent.com and KievPost.com. Visit uacrisis.org to see how Ukrainians are living through the Russian aggression, learn how to help, read the news as seen by Ukrainians every day. All of this helps us understand the very real consequences of military conflict around the globe, not just in Ukraine. Visit foodnotbombs.net to help combat hunger and promote peace. Today's update: Vinnytsia, 200 kilometers southwest of Kiev, population 400,000. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelinskyy's ominous warning just a day before, Sunday the 6th, has become a reality. Yesterday, Russia announced a major airstrike on Ukraine, prompting Zelinskyy to press again for a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which would require neighboring countries to provide airstrikes against Russian aircraft that violate the no-fly zone. This morning, 8 rockets struck the city of Vinnytsia, completely destroying its international airport and adding to Russia's ongoing targeting of Ukraine's infrastructure. Zelinskyy called for the skies over Ukraine to be treated as, quote, a humanitarian airspace. The airstrike on Vinnytsia has renewed Zelenskyy's calls for either a no-fly zone or the delivery of fighter jets so that Ukraine can protect its own airspace. The airstrike on Vinnytsia occurred just hours before Ukraine and Russia met in Belarus for a third round of negotiations in an attempt to bring the unprovoked war to an end. The last 2 talks attempted to establish humanitarian corridors to allow Ukrainian civilians to leave the country, and on the third round the topic of corridors apparently fell flat. Russian delegation head Vladimir Medinsky stated, quote, "Our expectations from negotiations were not fulfilled. We hope that next time we will be able to take a more significant step forward," end quote. Kiev's presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak sent a contradictory tweet, quote, "We have achieved some positive results concerning the logistics of humanitarian corridors," end quote. However, it's not likely that Russia's agreement on humanitarian corridors will stick. During a televised speech yesterday, President Zelinskyy called them corridors of blood, referring to Russia's apparent targeting of unarmed civilians as they attempt to evacuate through agreed-upon routes and breaking a ceasefire agreement over the past 2 days. Indeed, Russia's proposal for humanitarian corridors is disingenuous. Russia offered safe passage for refugees fleeing Kiev, Mariupol, Kharkiv, and Sumy, as long as they made their way to Russia or Belarus. Russia said it would begin flying Ukrainians from Kiev to Russia. A spokesperson for President Zelinskyy called the idea of evacuating Ukrainians to Russia or Belarus, quote, completely immoral, end quote, adding that Russia was trying to, quote, use people suffering to create a television picture. They are citizens of Ukraine. They should have the right to evacuate to the territory of Ukraine, end quote. Russia's offer fell flat with world leaders, too. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield, speaking at the UN Security Council meeting on the growing humanitarian crisis, said, quote, "We need Russia's firm, clear, public, and unequivocal commitment to allow and facilitate immediate, unhindered humanitarian access for humanitarian partners in Ukraine," end quote. France's ambassador, Nicolas de Rivière, said, quote, "I don't know of too many Ukrainians who wish to seek refuge in Russia. This is hypocrisy," end quote. Attempting to spin the narrative, Russian envoy to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, said that Ukrainian authorities weren't allowing civilians to flee. The International Red Cross, arguably a neutral party whose aim is to make sure humans remain alive, reported that the humanitarian corridor prepared by Russia for civilians fleeing Mariupol was full of mines on Sunday. Mines that blow up when you step on them. On a humanitarian corridor. Director of Operations for the International Committee of the Red Cross, Dominic Stillhart, confirms this claim in an interview with the BBC's Radio 4, stating that when Red Cross staff attempted to leave Mariupol on an agreed-upon route, quote, "the indicated to them was actually mined," end quote. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told Reuters News that peace would come to Ukraine if they laid down their arms, amended its constitution to abandon the goal of joining NATO, and acknowledge Russia's claim on Crimea as well as the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Peskov, quote, We really are finishing the demilitarization of Ukraine. We will finish it. But the main thing is the Ukraine ceases its military action. They should stop their military action, and then no one will shoot." End quote. In Irpin, northwest of Ukraine's capital Kiev, Ukrainian civilians attempted to flee across a bombed-out bridge on March 6th. Shortly after, Russian troops began shelling the bridge, resulting in 8 dead, including a family of a mother, her teenage son, 8-year-old daughter, and a family friend. This specific event had multiple journalist witnesses. It was caught on camera by Andrei Dubchak, a freelance journalist working with Donbass Frontliner. Lindsay Addario, a photojournalist working for the New York Times, also witnessed the shelling, describing the aftermath. Quote, "Soldiers rushed to help, but the women and children were dead. A man traveling with them still had a pulse, but was unconscious and severely wounded. He later died." End quote. Russian troops are enclosing on Kiev and racking up civilian casualties. Russian forces have been heavily targeting cities and townships immediately surrounding Kiev: Irpin, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, and Mykolaiv. They've seen relentless bombing since Russia's invasion began, and that's been intensifying in the last few days. Russia's focus on Kiev is clear, as is their aim. Putin will not stop until he has overthrown Zelenskyy's government. Despite losing 11,000 soldiers so far, Putin isn't deterred. A wave of sanctions, both political and commercial, including BP, Exxon, Shell, Boeing, Airbus, Daimler, Ford, Harley-Davidson, Mercedes-Benz, Renault, Toyota, Volkswagen, Volvo, Disney, H&M, Lego, Nike, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Netflix, Apple, Dell, Google, Facebook, TikTok, Prada, Nissan, PVH Corp., which is the holding company of Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein, not like either of them are relevant anymore, along with Procter & Gamble, all refuse to serve the Russian market. They also seem to be doing very little to sway Putin away from his unnecessary war. The U.S. is looking to ban Russian oil imports. A bipartisan bill was introduced to the U.S. House of Representatives Monday with exactly this aim, also with no response from Putin. Putin's military main effort is to sack Kiev, with 3 supporting efforts in the Luhansk, Mariupol, and Kherson. We've covered these attacks extensively, and the campaign to dominate these areas appears to be coming to a head. The Ukrainian General Staff believes that Russian forces may attempt to encircle or seize the city center of Kiev in the next 24 to 96 hours. They may attempt an assault on Zaporizhia city within 48 to 72 hours. Allow me to break the fourth wall real quick. If you haven't noticed, we don't make this podcast to make money. It's not particularly fun to cover a war where you have to watch social media videos of people crying, people dying, bombs going off in the middle of a street, in the middle of a city, hitting buildings where people can't live anymore. It's all pretty depressing. But we can't stop, and we don't really know why. What is it all for, and why do we care so much? I think it's because when something makes so little sense as this, when Putin says his aim is to demilitarize Ukraine, which how could he possibly expect that when it would mean innocent civilians left to his unknown plan? When he says he wants to denazify it, we've already covered how this is absurd on its face. When we struggle to reconcile the words with the actions, we care because we have been here before. We have watched our own country do exactly what Putin is doing, and it has never been right. It has always been genocide. Watching it unfold and knowing what horrors the United States has brought to the world, knowing the horrors we ignore now, we're desperate to see it end. There will be no more genocide. Joseph Stalin has already played this song, having starved 3.5 million Ukrainians after Russian soldiers murdered farmers, village leaders, and priests, and then confiscated the nation's harvests, all because Ukraine didn't want to join the Soviet Union. Stalin believed Ukrainians had no right to exist, same as Putin does today. He does not see them as they are. He doesn't see them at all. President Zelinskyy is the opposite of everything Putin says he is. But remember that to Putin, this is not about Ukraine, because Ukraine is non-existent. It doesn't need to be there. It is a landmass that he does not control, yet intends to. What happens to its citizens, he doesn't care. Hitler didn't care when he marched through Ukraine to take Moscow. 9 million Ukrainians left dead, soldiers, civilians, and Jews. Hitler made the mistake of heading west in winter. Putin has moved east, with warmer months ahead. The destruction unfolding in cities across Ukraine proves Putin sees no value in it. Why destroy infrastructure if you wish to use it? The only reason is to drive its people away. 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees and counting. And Putin is getting exactly what he wants. If you murder thousands of them in the process, who will be left to complain? Me. Us. We will mourn this time not because it has changed the world order, but because we will have once again failed to uphold the mantle we ourselves created at the end of World War II, however disingenuous, false, or underhanded it may have been. We failed in Vietnam, Cambodia, Korea, during the Cold War, at the fall of the Soviet Union, at the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and we fail now by doing nothing. The United States and the United Kingdom exchanged the promise of protection, specifically the protection against Russia, when we convinced them to give up their nuclear weapons. We made Ukraine a sitting duck, and now we watch in real time as it's plucked from the water. Russia won't stop with Ukraine. President Zelinskyy is not being hyperbolic when he says the fall of Ukraine is the fall of Europe. He means it. Should Putin grind his way through this haphazard war and take this landmass from its people, he will then sit on the edge of Europe. Those non-EU border nations were meant to prevent this exact scenario. And yet we watch. We watch and we hem and haw. And in our hesitancy, we are complicit yet again in genocide. What does Ukraine need? They tell you exactly what they need. What will Russia do? Putin has been quite clear, exactly as he wishes. So long as we play a game he's not interested in, he doesn't care if he loses. The geopolitical strategy of Russia has nothing to do with NATO, democracy, or economics. The more bombs he drops, the less sense it will make to us. If he crushes an entire nation, we will simply look at it confused and in horror and wonder why our half measures failed. Garry Kasparov, chess master and former presidential candidate in Russia, knows the enemy and he knows the next move. Quote, "Don't believe anything the government says, but take Putin's words seriously. He's sick." This is the end of the post-war World War II order. We need to reconsider the idea of international security infrastructure against Putin, not involving him. End quote. I said it once, I'll say it again. Visit KievIndependent.com and KievPost.com. Visit uacrisis.org to see how Ukrainians are living through the Russian aggression, learn how to help, and read the news as seen by Ukrainians every day. This was March 7, 2022.